Good morning and happy Friday, everyone. I'm Deb Henton, Executive Director of MASA. I'm so pleased you could join us for our legislative update today with our MASA lobbyist, Valerie Doslin, who is just masterful at her position. And I know that she will have great information that can be very useful to you as you are planning your work moving forward and what has happened with the legislative session to date. So I'm going to turn it over quickly to Valerie so that she can share as much information as possible. And I will be interjecting here and there with a little bit of information that I know. So Valerie, please let the group know how you would like to deal with questions. If you want to take them as you're speaking, if you want them to wait, if you want them to put them in the chat, whatever works for you, and I will help you with that.
Great. Well, thank you, Deb, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I think in regards to questions, why don't you just put them in the chat, and then I will get to the questions after I get through my portion of the presentation. There is a lot of ground to cover. So just to kind of set us up for some context, first of all, the legislature is not done yet. They still have a number of different budget bills that they have yet to pass off the House and Senate floors and sent to the governor. While the education bill is done, they still have to do the tax bill. They still have to figure out what they're doing about bonding or capital infrastructure, health and human services. The marijuana, recreational use of marijuana bill has one more floor debate today in the Senate. And there's a state government finance bill. So there's still a lot of work. You know, there was some kind of thought that they might have been done by 7 a.m. today. That's not going to happen. They will likely be working over the weekend and through Monday to finish its work. Just some context too for the 2023 session. You know, it was the first time we were fully in person after 3 years of the pandemic. I will admit I got kind of used to doing my work remotely over Zoom. And so it did take many of us kind of an adjustment to get back to like doing our job like we normally do. It was a welcome way to do our work, and I liked it, but it did take us, you know, we kind of had to shift our gears a little bit. The DFL trifecta that was elected in November had a lot of new members. The makeup of the legislature is growing in diversity. And with those changes brought a lot of different priorities than what we've seen over the last several years of divided government. The session began on January 3rd, and to say it moved at a breakneck pace is an understatement. The number of bill introductions, hearings, and passage of bills into law was unprecedented. And just some context, as of Thursday, and bills can be introduced through the very last day of session, as of Thursday, 3,333 bills were introduced in the House and 3,346 bills were introduced in the Senate. In 2021, the last budget year, that they had 677 fewer bills introduced in the House and 774 fewer bills introduced in the Senate in 2021. So that's just a lot to keep track of and a lot of things to follow. I do also just want to give some context, you know, representing MASA. We all work very closely together with the other education organizations. We are the lobbyists who work for AMSD, MREA, MSBA, the principals, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Anoka, Hennepin. We are all a very tight-knit group of lobbyists, and we work very closely together. And so while sometimes you might just see one person testifying on behalf of they were testifying on behalf of all of us, and we all worked very closely together. And I think you will see that we all tried to do our best to represent everyone's concerns and issues at the legislature. I also wanted to give some context. We're still trying to read through the bill and figure everything out, and there's a lot of unanswered questions. I will do my best to try to answer those questions today, but we will really need NDE to answer those questions. And I know NDE does a lot of regional meetings throughout June, and they will be speaking at AMSD next week. So hopefully some of the questions that we get today, we can kind of tee up with MDE to be prepared to answer. So the 2023 session brought with the DFL trifecta, brought a lot of opportunities for us. The unprecedented budget surplus, strong support from the governor and the House and Senate, majorities gave us a lot of optimism for a productive budget session. And I appreciated going into the 2023 session with that optimism. You know, the 2022 session was somewhat deflating for all of us. So I had a lot of optimism going into the 2023 session. A lot of our priorities did advance this session. You know, we succeeded in getting a formula increase tied to inflation, and that has been part of our platform for years. We succeeded in getting a board renewal of existing operating referendum. That was also part of our platform for many years. Increased funding for the special ed and EL cross subsidies, efforts for grow your own initiatives and proposals to help increase the teaching profession advance. And then we also had a little teeny proposal we worked with different organizations on the type 3 vehicles, and all of those things were advanced. So there were a lot of opportunities, but with that, also we had a lot of challenges. The budget surplus was quite significant. We hear words like historic and transformational, but that also brought a lot of challenges because with money comes a lot more people at the legislature with their asking for their priorities to be advanced. Also, the budget surplus, while it was at $17.5 billion, that was not all ongoing funding. The structural balance of the budget surplus was only $5 billion. And there's really a backlog of needs that hadn't been addressed over the last several years. Besides education, there is needs and the priorities too for the DFL majorities regarding childcare, nursing home and group homes, elimination of the Social Security taxes, startup costs for paid family leave. Those all kind of took a bite at this $5 billion structural balance. Other challenges that we faced this legislature session, this session with the DFL trifecta was there's a lot of priorities that the unions brought forward that we ended up having to oppose and really push back against. And I'll talk more in details about them, but they included terms and conditions of employment and limiting inherent managerial rights, unemployment insurance for hourly school employees, paid family medical leave, earned safe and sick time. Other requirements included increases in teacher prep time, tiered licensure changes, student discipline changes, mandated minimum starting salary for hourly school employees, mandated class sizes in statute, and then additional graduation requirements. So I first of all want to just say thank you. Thank you so much for your advocacy this last session. It was a huge, heavy lift this year, advocating for our funding priorities, but also advocating on those kind of long list of challenges that I just laid out. Your advocacy really did make a difference. And while we didn't succeed on some things like the PELRA changes, we did succeed on pushing back on others like mandated prep time, mandated class sizes in statute, employee minimum hourly salaries, etc. And your voice was heard at the legislature. I often heard in committee or in private conversations with legislators and on the floors of the House and Senate during debates on various bills that they have heard from you. And your voice did make a difference. Let's see. And then also I just want, and I would say, I think a really clear example of where your voice made a difference is while the unemployment insurance benefit did pass, it originally was not funding was not included in the House or Senate bills. And we kept hearing from the chairs of those committees, well, we gave you formula increases, you can take it out of the formula increases. And because of all of the conversations you had with your local legislators, really brought about the fact that we were successful in getting funding in the budget bills. So thank you so much for that. So I'm just going to kind of go over it. You did all receive a summary from me that Deb sent out, I think on Tuesday. I can't remember, it's kind of a blur. I am currently updating that for some things that I missed because I did put it together fairly quickly. So once session adjourns, you'll get a more up-to-date summary from me. But just generally as an overview, the increase for K-12 education was $2.264 billion for this next biennium and $3.2 billion for the 26-27 biennium. And there's an additional 300 million for early childhood programs that was part of another early education bill. You know, the formula was increased 4 and 2 and tied to inflation. And just to note on the inflation, that is capped at 2%. And there is also, it's not to be less than 2%, but it's also, I'm sorry, it's not to be less than 2%, and it's not to exceed 3% per year. I'll just start right on school unemployment insurance. So the proposal to extend unemployment insurance to hourly school employees was included in the final bill. The effective date of that is May 28, 2023. The bill establishes a school unemployment insurance aid account that's to be administered by the Minnesota Department of Education. And the bill directs MDE to reimburse school districts, charter schools, and cooperative school districts in a manner as specified by the commissioner. So we will have to get some more information from MDE about how they propose to go about reimbursing school districts.
There's a question, Valerie, in the chat about when that begins, the funding.
Yep.
Does it start?
Yep, I'm getting right to that.
Okay, thanks.
So the funding is available in fiscal year, this next current fiscal year, and it is available for 3 years. So they appropriate the money all in the first year of the biennium, but once it's expended, it has to be used by 2027, and once it's expended, there's no funding. And then there's some additional $64 million for the special ed unemployment insurance, which begins in FY26. So I really think with the unemployment insurance benefit, we do need to hear from the Department of Education about some of these more detailed questions. We don't have these questions answered just yet. But hourly school employees will be able to apply for unemployment and benefits for this starting May 27th or after when your school year ends. And this also applies to school bus contractors that wouldn't normally, some qualify already for unemployment insurance. This applies to those school bus contractors that were limited. And my understanding is the funding is for school employees. This would not cover any additional costs that districts might see in their school bus contracts as a result of this requirement. It requires the MDE and DEED to report to the legislative committees the cost, the reimbursable costs, and the number of school employees receiving unemployment during the summer term. And so they will have to report to the legislature next year how many people have applied for this benefit and what those costs were. Now, just some context, the original governor's budget recommendations and the bill that was advancing as a standalone bill appropriated $135 million annually. And then there was a big debate in the legislature. The House and Senate Democrats said they don't agree with the fiscal note. They don't think it's going to be that high. And that is ultimately, I think, why they only landed on $135 million in one-time funding. In regards to when you can expect the clarification about UI, we need to get that questions answered from the Department of Ed. And I know that I think Deb we will be working on it. And yes, when the UI money runs out, school districts would be responsible to pay for 100%. And there is a provision in the bill that says you cannot use your unemployment insurance levy to cover those costs. So the answer is no, you cannot use your unemployment levy. So okay. I know there's a lot of unanswered questions, and unfortunately, we aren't able to answer those questions today. So I'm hoping, I believe that there's a call today to try to get some more information. So stay tuned. And yes, there will be opportunity in future years, next legislative session, for us to come back and have a conversation with the legislature about the impact of this UI benefit and try to advocate for more costs. The special ed cross subsidy aid factor was increased to 44% from 44% in FY24, and then up to 50% in FY27 and later. There's additional funding for English learner cross subsidy. The allowance is increased from $704 to $1,228 in FY24 and 26, and then to $1,774 after that. There's also the concentration factor is increased starting in 24. School districts are authorized a one-time renewal of the school board operating referendum. That was the Senate position. The House bill just allowed you to renew referendum. They ended up taking the Senate position on that. There's a number of initiatives regarding teacher and staff shortages. There's significant investments in Grow Your Own, $37 million next biennium, and almost $51 million in the 26-27 biennium. There's also $30 million for a special ed teacher pipeline and other teacher shortage area initiatives. The Collaborative Urban and Greater Minnesota Educator Color of Grants also get some additional funding of almost $9 million. There's a new teacher residency grant proposal for $6 million. That funding is also ongoing. There's also a new specific Grow Your Own grant program for early childhood educators. And then Black Men Teach also received some ongoing funding, $1 million every biennium. The student support personnel proposal that we've seen over the last, I don't know, probably 8 years now, I think, maybe longer, was passed. School districts will receive $11.94 per pupil starting in FY24. In FY25, it goes up to $17.08. And then in FY26, it goes up to $48.73. It creates a separate category for intermediate and other cooperative school districts. If you can't hire a full-time employee, it allows you to contract for those services. And it also allows you to use the funding to make permanent a position that was put in place using CARES Act dollars. The paraprofessional training bill that we've seen over the last several years also passed. The Senate bill had 16 hours of required training. The House bill had 8, and that's what was put in. That's what was passed. School districts are reimbursed for those paraprofessional training costs, and this includes all school districts, including intermediates and cooperatives, and it's based on their expenses incurred. Compensatory, as you know, the compensatory formula was held harmless for 1 year when the universal meals proposal passed. They extended that. My understanding, it's still a little confusing to me. I don't quite understand it, but my understanding is that they've extended the held harmless for a few more years, which is what the governor proposed in his revised budget. They also realign and redefine the eligible uses of compensatory revenue. And then kind of this is a big one, it requires that 80% of your compensatory revenue has to remain at the site. The Senate bill had, or the House bill had 60%. They took the Senate position at 80%. And then there's a new report that's required. It requires MDE to report to the legislature regarding whether or not paper school meal eligibility forms can be eliminated without any consequences to school funding formulas. I'm just going to pause here to answer some questions.
I'll catch you up, Valerie. So remember I sent you that question yesterday about the district runs being different. Somebody pointed that out to me, and you let me know that they were different because the House and the Senate had different numbers. The question is what runs do should our districts be looking to for the final amount?
I will check on that.
Okay. And then President Hillman wants to know, when do the comp ed changes, compensatory changes go into effect?
I will have to look at the bill. I believe this next FY starting in July 1st.
And then a couple of questions around, again, around the student support personnel money, you know, can they can retain the personnel they hired with the CARES Act money. Can they supplant positions originally funded with the COVID relief funds? It goes back to 2021, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Valerie? Do you remember?
I believe so.
Okay. And then there's more questions around UI. A person is wondering about the insurance portion, because when a person currently files for unemployment, they have COBRA for their insurance. And will this be the case with the new option of employees getting unemployment? Don't know the answer to that one. That may be something that will come out. The call Valerie referenced was something I have been invited to join at 2:30 today with Kathy Erickson from MDE. So maybe we'll learn more information. I'm certainly going to continue to share with the department that so many of your questions are about that. There was a chart that was released, Valerie, that had shown that, let's see here. About unemployment insurance, the document I sent yesterday, I guess said fiscal year 25 was when the money was available. So we'll have to take a look at that. I'm not sure which one that was. The school library aid, Anne Marie Foucault wants to know about that. Valerie, I'm not sure if you're going to get to that later in your discussion.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can we just take a pause?
Yep.
It's probably easier if I scroll through the questions, because I am going to get to some of these things that are listed in the questions. So
sure.
I'm just going to wait until the end to get through all the questions. I think is probably easier. So there was, okay, so compensatory, so there are changes to, so I'm kind of going through all the funding proposals right now. I will talk about the policy after I'm done going through the funding proposal. There is also funding for grants to school districts for non-exclusionary discipline initiatives. That's 1.75 million per year. Special ed, in addition to the cross subsidy changes, the special ed services are now required for children with a disability until age 22. I'm going to take a pause here, Deb, and let you talk about the READ Act. Sounds good, Valerie. Thank you so much. So the READ Act is contained within the bill, and the READ Act is an effort that was really in the works for quite a while, and a number of you participated in giving us feedback on what would be helpful for you if there was a bill focused on literacy going forward. So we worked closely with the authors of the bill, and that was Representative Heather Edelson and Stacy Stanley of Edina, knows her well. I'm thankful to the curriculum specialists who helped provide information for me so that when I was in conversation with Representative Edelson, I could talk to her about what we thought would work for our districts. So the bill is focused on evidence-based reading. And you will, beginning this year, this next coming school year, have to give 2 screeners to your students. And the screeners that you will use will be provided by MDE. You will be able to pick from a list of screeners. And the screeners will also include screening for dyslexia. So you will need to give a screener to your students in grades K through 3, or just one second, it might be 1 through 3. It's 1 through 3. Wait a minute, kindergarten. Forgive me, it's kindergarten, grades 1, 2, and 3. You need to give the screeners that are approved by the Department of Education within the first 6 weeks of school, and then within the last 6 weeks of school. And you're going to have to report information about your results to the Department of Education by June 15th of each school year. So again, that is going to take effect right away. This next school year, you have to give one of those screeners. There's a change in the literacy goal. The literacy goal is to have students reading at or above every grade level that they're in. You may have recalled that in previous plans that you had to submit, you had to have kids reading at grade level by 3rd grade. That language is removed, and it's every student must read at grade level every single year. All teachers and staff are going to have to be trained in evidence-based learning practices by 2027. You will need to provide training, however,
by July 1, 2024. So this is you have next year to do this. You have to provide training to all intervention teachers who work with students in grades K through 12, all classroom teachers of students in kindergarten through 3, and children in pre-kindergarten programs. So all classroom teachers, K through 3, and in pre-kindergarten programs, special education teachers, curriculum directors, instructional support staff who provide reading instruction, employees who select literacy instructional materials for a district, and all other teachers and instructional staff that need to be, for the READ Act, a requirement in the READ Act, they have to be trained no later than July 1 of 2027. So next year, again, you're going to need to get your intervention teachers, your K through 3 classroom teachers, your special education teachers, your curriculum directors, any instructional support staff who are providing reading instruction, and anybody who selects literacy materials trained in evidence-based reading techniques. The Department of Education and CARE, the Center for Applied Research and Education at the U of M, will work together to provide training programs for you. There will be more than one training program to be that you can choose. And there will also be more than one curriculum that you can choose for your literacy work in your district. As to screeners, parents can opt out. They will need to be in consultation with a teacher, but they have the right to opt out of the screening system. Let's see. You will have to submit a literacy plan annually, and you will need to update that. You will need to train early childhood teachers. And you'll have to post your plan on your website and submit it to the Commissioner of Education, not something you're unused to doing. You know how to do that. And again, MDE has to recommend to you multiple screeners that you can choose from and multiple curriculum. This is not a grant program. This is a reimbursement program. And you can go back and ask for reimbursement of curriculum that you have purchased since 2021. We don't know how you do that because we need to wait for MDE to come up with the procedures to do that, but it's good news for us. By August 30th of 2025, you have to contract or else employ a lead literacy specialist. And that is somebody who's going to help train your teachers and help pick curriculum and so on. So by 2025. So that's an important thing for you to consider. You will also be able to contract with a cooperative unit if you cannot if your district cannot afford to hire one by themselves, or if one is not available. You can imagine staffing this many positions will be difficult. And MDE has by July 1st, they have to identify the screeners that you're going to choose from. And they also have to, by next January, identify 5 different curriculums that are evidence-based that you can use. There is a reconsideration process. If, for example, you don't want to use the screeners, or you don't want to use curricula that have been identified by the Department of Education, you can request for reconsideration of what you're using to say that it meets the professional development requirements. So there is kind of an appeal process brought in. There is a lot of money in the Act, and the money is to go for professional development, as you can imagine. There is $34,950,000 appropriated for professional development. But of that, 18 million is going to the regional literacy networks and 16,700,000 for statewide training. So again, that cooperatives in the state are going to be heavily involved working with CARE and MDE to provide professional development. There's also 35 million in the bill for curriculum and instructional materials. And again, it's a reimbursement process through the Commissioner of Education. So good news, you don't have to write a grant for it, but there is only that 35 million. We don't know how long it's going to last. The appropriation is only for this, this coming biennium. And the department should help us because they are to hire a literacy specialist. So that will be good news. And there's an appropriation for them to do so. So with that, Valerie, that I think summarizes what I know about the READ Act.
Okay.
Do we have questions in the chat? Is there permission you have prior to purchasing the curriculum? Wade asked that. If you choose the curriculum that's on the list, you will not have to have permission. But if you chose a different one, you just bought it within the last couple of years, you can apply to have that cost of that curriculum covered. If it's not one that appears on the list that the department has to develop, then you may have to explain that it does meet the qualifications of the curriculum that is discussed in the READ Act. And Wade, there is very specific language about the 5 areas that need to be covered in any curriculum, including, of course, phonics, phonemic awareness, and so on. Let's see. Could the person, Molly asked if the person could be a lead literacy and an advis interventionist, for example. I don't know that that is the case because in the language of the bill, it talks about, it has a definition for a literacy, lead literacy person, and it does not say that they can have multiple positions in the district. It just talks about what they have to do. Can we seek reimbursement for literacy training already conducted? And you've done literacy training. Tim asked that question. It's a really good question, Tim. And what I noticed in the final outcome of the bill, there wasn't discussion about doing that. There had been previously, but I think it is something that we can ask going forward if you can get that training reimbursed. We know that curriculum purchases can be reimbursed. I'm not sure, Chris, how the department's going to handle the READ Act and if they're going to provide a summary. I will be in conversation with the commissioner, I think on Monday, so I can ask if that is the case. If not, I can probably try to summarize it myself because I have it all marked up in the bill. If
Deb,
students are not, oh, I was just going to answer one more question. No?
I was just going to say, I will include more detail in my updated summary.
Okay, great. Mark asked about if students are not at grade level, you've been asked, or you're encouraged in the READ Act to develop personal learning plans. Really glad you're not required to. We worked hard to make sure that that was not a requirement. You are encouraged to do that. You are encouraged to use MTSS. I failed to mention that. Many of you already use MTSS right now. And again, you're encouraged to use it, not required. So you would still continue to monitor progress, use interventions, report the progress, collect data as you would in the MTSS system. Okay, and there was a question about renewing operating levies. It's not for capital projects, it's just for operating levies. That's another plank on next year's platform, I'm guessing, that we would ask for that. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Valerie.
Yep. And I know there's a lot of questions in the chat. I will get to those. I just want to try to get through the content first. So the next item I wanted to make sure to highlight is there is a new funding formula for school library aid. You know, it kind of came out of nowhere. The chair of the Senate Education Finance Committee is a former media specialist. And so it came from her. It appropriates $45 million starting in FY24. And it goes up a little bit in future bienniums for this new school library aid. Districts will get $16.11 times the adjusted pupil units or a minimum of $40,000. Aid must be used for salaries and benefits of a school library media specialist, electronic computer or audiovisual equipment, IT infrastructure and digital tools, electronic and material resources, or furniture, equipment, or supplies. There were some changes to pupil transportation. The transportation sparsity is increased. And I apologize, I don't have that I don't know if I have the correct number in my summary. I'll have to double check that. There's also new transportation categories for homeless student transportation and foster student transportation and area learning center transportation. There's 24 million in one-time grants for school cybersecurity. We were also able to get the Safe Schools statute changed to allow school districts to use current Safe Schools revenue to make cybersecurity expenditures, including costs for computer hardware, software, and cybersecurity insurance. Voluntary pre-K was expanded, so the existing slots were made permanent, and funding was provided to add another 5,200 seats. I don't know how the department is going to allocate that funding, if they're going to expand it to other school districts that currently don't get funding. I don't have the answer to that. And then there's another provision. I don't remember ever seeing something like this in a budget bill, but it basically sets aside $50 million for the legislature to act on next session. But they said in the bill language that their intent is that will fund an additional 3,000 more slots on top of what is already appropriated. But the legislature will have to act on that next session. Just some things in community ed, early childhood health and developmental screening was increased by 30%. And then community education will get a little bump. And then the Adults with Disabilities program is expanded statewide. Those are the highlights on the funding provision. So I'm gonna just kind of quickly try to go through the questions here. And I will, we'll save the questions and I'll do my best to try to answer them as well. And we can send a follow-up when Dave sends out the recording. Yes, school districts did get the ability to renew an existing referendum for 1 year. The EL change, I believe, goes into effect starting for FY24. Yes, that's correct, FY24. I'm not sure about the question regarding library aid to plant a current licensed media specialist. We'll have to check on that.
You have to have a license. Valerie, it's on, it's in this article, section 15, beginning on 296.23. For those of you that have the bill, it talks about what you must have, and you definitely have to have a licensed librarian or media specialist.
What the question is, can you use current fund, the new funding to plant current costs for a current library media specialist? So I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, it says that one of the uses of it is the salaries and benefits of a school media library specialist.
Yeah, I'm making I don't know if that's a new library specialist or current library specialist. I presume it is a current library specialist, but I'm not sure yet.
Okay, thank you.
Jason shared that on an AMSD call yesterday, the UI payments will begin on September 24th, 2023. What makes a person eligible for unemployment? That is a very good question. Anyone who qualifies for unemployment insurance now, an hourly worker that qualifies for unemployment now, needs to follow all the current unemployment laws. And they have to, if suitable employment was offered and they decline it, they can't get unemployment insurance. But there is a big unanswered question, which we've tried all session long to get answered, is what is considered suitable employment. So the best example I can come up with is if you're a high school para and you're offered a job in a summer school age childcare program, is that considered suitable employment? They've said to us that it's really on a case-by-case basis. So more has to follow on that. Yes, the special ed services for students age 22 is for the next school year. I'm not sure this question, when you say provided by MDE, does that mean also funded? I'm not sure what that's referring to. Yes, letters training, I believe, would be approved for the funding, but Deb can answer that for sure. I think Dan's gotten all the questions. In my summary, there is a list of what's allowable for school library aid, and that summary will be sent out again as well. Matt, I will try to give an overview on the discipline changes. I'm going on to the policy provisions now. Okay, I think that's okay. So on to the policy provisions. We have some new course requirements. Students beginning in the grade 9 in the 2024-2025 school year must complete a course for credit in personal finance, and they must complete a course for credit in government and citizenship. I would also add, though, that citizenship test, the requirement to take the citizenship test, has been repealed. There is also districts are required to offer ethnic study courses. Students don't have to take them, but they're required to offer ethnic study courses aligned with the state social studies standards starting in the 2026 school year. And starting in the 2027 school year, they're supposed to provide ethnic studies instruction in elementary and middle school aligned with the social studies standards. And then also districts are required to offer as part of its social studies curriculum education on the Holocaust and genocide, again, aligned with social studies standards. Teacher licensure changes, the requirement for candidates to have a passing score on the board adopted exam has been repealed. The proposal to remove the pathway from tier 2 to tier 3 for 3 years of professional experience, that actually did not pass, so current law still stands on that. But there are some other changes in tiered licensure, which I'm still trying to get my head around. But my understanding is, in some information I've received, it still is going to be challenging for people who aren't enrolled in the teacher prep program or hold a master's degree to be able to move from tier 2 to tier 3. There also was a short call substitute pilot program that was established. On to discipline, and I'm going to give a caveat. Roger Aronson, the lobbyist for the Principals Association, is really the one who's taken the lead on all of these things. So I really defer to him on a lot of things. I think a couple of the biggest changes: it prohibits dismissal of a student in kindergarten through grade 3 unless non-exclusionary discipline measures have been exhausted. And then there's also districts are limited. The use of recess detention is limited. Those are probably the two biggest changes, although there's quite a few changes. I think also the limits the use of withdrawal agreements to 12 months. In school, it adds in-school suspension to the definition of suspension to mean an instance in which a pupil is temporarily removed from the classroom for at least a half a day for disciplinary purposes. Let's see. Number of changes have been made regarding American Indian education, and there's actually a whole article about American Indian education in the bill. American Indian mascots are prohibited starting in September 2025. There are exceptions. A school district, if they're within the reservation of a federally recognized tribal nation, where at least 95% of the students meet the definition of an American Indian student, is exempt from that requirement. And a school may seek an exemption by submitting a request in writing to all 11 federally recognized tribal nations in Minnesota and the Tribal Nations Education Committee by September 1st of 2023. So if you're a school district that has a American Indian mascot, you will have to do some work this summer to get the exemption. Graduation ceremonies and tribal regalia and objects of cultural significance, districts cannot prohibit an American Indian student from wearing tribal regalia or objects of cultural significance. The bill also replaces Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day on the list of holidays that a school district may conduct school. If you do, it requires at least 1 hour of the school program to be on Indigenous Peoples Day, to be devoted to the observance of the day, and a list of topics which the district may provide professional development to teachers and staff on instruction for students. There's also a requirement and that outlines that what if districts perform active shooter simulations and active shooter drills, there's a list of requirements that you have to follow, a list of protocols that must be followed. There is a new requirement for pre-K licensure. It requires a school district to employ a licensed teacher in a pre-K program. There are exceptions. We were able to get an exception so that if someone has taught at least 5 years before September 1st in an early childhood school-based program without a license, they do not need to get a license. And this provision doesn't apply to a school district if you run a certified license exempt childcare, like school-age childcare, or if you run a fully licensed childcare program. This requirement doesn't exist. It doesn't apply. And then school districts are required to submit a class size report annually on ratios by each grade to the Commissioner of Ed. And then it requires the department to submit a report to the legislature every year. That is the extent of all the things I wanted to highlight as part of the education finance bill. There is also this omnibus jobs, workforce, and labor bill that passed that includes a lot of policy related to PELRA and teacher bargaining rights. And I know all of you are very familiar with this because it was a very hard fought effort on our part to try to get it removed. Thank you to all of you who contacted your legislators. They definitely, we heard from them that they were hearing from you. So the omnibus jobs bill, Senate File 3035, includes they include a larger package of labor provisions that all of the different labor organizations wanted regarding changes to PELRA. The ones that apply to school districts are, first of all, removing the terms and conditions, or adding to the terms and conditions of employment a requirement to bargain over adult to student ratios, student testing, and student to personnel ratios. It also removes the number of personnel as a matter of inherent managerial policy. It requires school districts to negotiate with its union on e-learning days. It reduces the probationary period from 120 to 90. And it also aligns the probationary period for teachers in the cities of the first class under the Tenure Act as aligned with the continuing contract districts. It adds adult basic ed and ECFE teachers to obtain continuing contract status or tenure status. It modifies the definition of teachers for purposes of PELRA to include someone who's teaching in a pre-K program or early learning program. If you have those individuals in a different bargaining unit right now, they can choose to stay in that bargaining unit as long as it's certified before, I think I have the wrong date here, January 2024, but I have to double check on that. And then it adds tier 1 teachers to the same bargaining unit as all other teachers. It adds requirements on what districts need to provide the union within 20 days, what data districts need to provide the union within 20 days of hire, and every 120 days, you have to provide the bargaining unit information on employees, including job title, worksite location, home address, home and cell phone number, work and home email address, and date of hire. You have to give the union access 30 minutes within 30 calendar days from the date of hire. You must allow the exclusive representative to communicate with bargaining unit members using their employer issued email addresses, as well as provide space available. Those are the PELRA changes. In that bill is the earned sick time provisions. Defines anyone as an employee who has worked at least 80 hours. It requires the employer to earn 1 hour of paid earned sick time, safe and sick time for every 30 hours worked. And I have a separate standalone summary of all of these different labor provisions that I will also be sending out to you that spells these things out in more detail. And then lastly, the Paid Family and Medical Leave Act bill is on its way to the governor. If it's not at the governor's desk, it will be. The Senate passed it yesterday, the House passed it, or they both passed it yesterday. So it establishes a family and medical leave benefit. A couple of changes from what we've seen in the past. So it still is a new tax on employees and employers with a rate of 0.7% of employees' wages, with a minimum of half paid by the employee and half paid by the employer. The maximum length of benefits is 20 weeks. But the big change, I think, is the effective date. It's extended a little further out, so it's a January 1st, 2026 effective date for benefits and premiums, benefits to kick in and the premiums to be charged.
So Valerie, I'd like to take the question from Pam Miller about ethnic studies. Pam, if you do read the bill, I just want to give you the lines where the language appears that would address your question, and it starts on page 40, lines 40.14 in my copy, but Valerie and I have different copies. But there is a definite section on ethnic studies requirements. You just need to offer the course. And the course may fulfill social studies, language arts, math, or science credit if it meets the state academic standards. So again, you just have to offer it. It's not a requirement for graduation. I hope that helps to answer your question.
So some other questions. It looks like there's some confusing information about the American Indian Education Aid and the district runs about why some districts are getting funding and others aren't, even though they meet the requirements to qualify. I don't know the answer to that question, but I will work on getting the answer to that question. I do also just want to add, we have a number of different course requirements. And while you might not be able to see it, those things did get a lot better, especially the ethnic studies. We started with kids having to take ethnic studies to graduate, to getting it down to where districts have to offer a course. And one of the other things that we got out of the bill was it required school districts to do a community needs assessment and have a standalone meeting with the community to talk about ethnic studies. We were able to get that out of the definition, out of the proposal. So it was significantly amended over after having conversations with the advocates and the author of that proposal. Same for the credit requirements. They did get a little bit better over time. Let's check some other questions. How do small schools offer it when we have few students who will likely want it? Yes, that's a concern. I think that's a question we should ask the department. I do know it could be offered through online learning. If you're part of a consortium or a program that might offer it, that could be a way to meet that requirement. So this is a lot of information to digest. We've all been digesting it very quickly. And as I mentioned, once the legislature adjourns, I'm currently updating my summary to fix some errors that I noticed in it, as well as add some more detail. And then we are going to save the questions to these chat, and I will work over the next few days on trying to get the questions answered to the extent that I can. Amy had a question about the benefits for paid leave. If they begin on January 26th, do the taxes that need to be levied begin sooner? My understanding is they all begin on the same date, but I may have a misunderstanding of that bill. But when I spoke with MSBA the other day, that's what I understood from the question. But again, I need to get that clarified. Wondering if offer is different than running a course. Yeah, that's a good question, Jason. So did you hear correctly that we have to negotiate who pays how much? Yes, it will have to be negotiated. There was language in the Senate bill that said that clarified that you could negotiate it, but it specified the cost was shared equally between employer and employee, and that was removed from the bill when the paid family leave bill was in conference committee. The tax or premium in the paid family leave bill is is intent to put in money. For paid family leave, they establish a whole new department within DEED, and it's an account like the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund that individuals, when they go on paid family leave, will apply from the state agency to get funding, much like they do for unemployment insurance. We have to get the answer on the COBRA question. I'm not sure about that. And I'm hoping MDE is going to release some information soon about, and maybe start having some seminars and webinars for folks on how this program is going to be administered. And I hope that we get some questions to that this afternoon on this call that Deb or I will be attending.
Valerie, did you answer the question about from Daniel Ludvigson about, do teachers need to utilize any of their leave prior to accessing paid medical leave? We had talked about that many times with legislators, but I don't believe that that was carried forward, correct?
No, I don't believe they do.
Darren asked a question about science. I will try to, and if I don't get to it by the time the call ends, Valerie, as she noted a number of times, will answer these questions as best we can. It's a lot to digest, and we are really grateful for your patience with us as we both learned so much about what actually made it into the final bill.
Well, I appreciate everyone's time today, and someone had put in the chat that it was a wild session, and this is my 26th legislative session, and I have never experienced a session like this. I was around a lobbyist when we had the last CFL trifecta, and this was nothing. That session was nothing like this one. And then just on an end note, it's not officially announced yet until they adjourn, but the 2024 session will begin February 12th, 2024. And then I also just wanted to add the Minnesota House of Representatives, their building is going to be undergoing a major remodeling. They aren't getting a brand new building like the Senate, but they are remodeling the existing state office building. So things are going to be very discombobulated. They are going to be moving out of their offices. I don't know if they will be, I don't think they'll be back in their offices at all next session. I think I'm not 100% sure exactly what's happening, but we will have to navigate a different environment next session as the state office building undergoes construction.
So I will thank you, Valerie. You have been amazing.
I'm sorry, Deb, I forgot one thing.
Okay, go ahead.
I have it on my list, and this is very last minute. As you know, there's been an effort by Education Minnesota to bring about significant pension reform to try to equalize the Rule of 90 teachers and the non-Rule of 90 teachers, or Tier 1 versus Tier 2. Nothing really advanced, but something did pop up at the very last minute. A spreadsheet for the tax conference committee agreement came out, and there was a line item appropriation of $97 million in FY 26, I believe, to bring about some kind of pension reform. We haven't seen the language yet, but I know that the cost is that's not a lot of money, but I think it's the start in trying to equalize the inequities between the Tier 1 and Tier 2 teachers.
That was an important ad, and I assume pension reform could be on our platform for some time to come. And as I mentioned earlier, there are items that we are already knowing that we want to probably add to the platform next year, like being able to approve capital levies again, like you do operating levies. So don't hesitate to contact Valerie and I if you are seeing things that we need to work on in the future, because we start really right away once the session has completed in trying to develop our ideas for what we should advocate for in the future. Valerie, thank you so much. Your advocacy is essential at the Capitol. You make a difference every single day for our kids in the state of Minnesota, and we are really grateful. As one superintendent shared with me, you know, the policy that we saw coming about in the legislative session has improved tremendously. There's some things we're still very worried about. And we have lots of questions about, but we know we're in a better place than some of it was in the preceding months. So thank you for your effort. And I thank everyone very much for joining this call. And we will get back to you with a lot of additional information. So please be watching your email and hang in there with us. As we learn new things, we will share them with you. Take care. Have a happy Friday and a wonderful weekend ahead.